Welcome to Debunk File. Here on the channel, we have never attempted to make a proper holiday special, but the last few years have been chaotic to say the least, and I think it's about time we make a video that truly captures the spirit of the holidays. There's a chill in the air, and with no time to spare, festivities line the streets, and we've got a story that just can't be beat. A true Christmas classic with a mysterious background. Gather around the fireplace, grab a cup of hot cocoa, and let me tell you the true story of the man who really wrote "Twas the Night Before Christmas." You may be thinking to yourself, of course we know who wrote "Twas the Night Before Christmas. It's a classic story that's told time and time again around this time of year. But in reality, the debate about who created this enduring story has been going on since the 1800s. And today, we hope to clear the air. Clarke Clement Moore was an author and a scholar, being a professor of Greek and Oriental literature at the General Theological Seminary of the Protestant Episcopal Church. Moore gained a fortune in his side business of architecture and real estate. Moore wrote on history, translated ancient text, and formed a dictionary of the Hebrew language. In his spare time, he wrote poetry, which he would collect in his portfolio. On December 24th, 1822, Moore and his children gathered around a fire on Christmas Eve to hear Moore's new poem. It was titled A Visit from St. Nicholas, and went as follows.
"'Twas the night before Christmas, when all through the house not a creature was stirring, not even a mouse. The stockings were hung by the chimney with care, in hopes that St. Nicholas would soon be there. The children were nestled all snug in their beds, while visions of sugar plums danced in their heads. And Mama in her kerchief and I in my cap had just settled our brains for a long winter's nap, when out on the lawn there arose such a clatter, I sprang from the bed to see what was the matter. Away to the window I flew like a flash, tore open the shutters and threw up the sash. The moon on the breast of the new-fallen snow gave luster of midday to the objects below, when what to my wondering eyes should appear but a miniature sleigh and 8 tiny reindeer, with a little old driver so lively and quick I knew in a moment it must be St. Nick. More rapid than eagles his coursers they came, and he whistled and shouted and called them by name. Now Dasher, now Dancer, now Prancer and Vixen, on Comet, on Cupid, on Donner and Blitzen, to the top of the porch, to the top of the wall. Now dash away, dash away, dash away all. As dry leaves that before the wild hurricane fly, when they meet with an obstacle mount to the sky, so up to the housetop of the coursers they flew, with the sleigh full of toys, and St. Nicholas too. And then in a twinkling I heard on the roof the prancing and pawing of each little hoof. As I drew in my head and was turning around, down the chimney St. Nicholas came with a bound. He was dressed all in fur from his head to his foot, and his clothes were all tarnished with ashes and soot. A bundle of toys he had flung on his back, and he looked like a peddler just opening his pack. His eyes how they twinkled, his dimples how merry, his cheeks were like roses, his nose like a cherry. His droll little mouth was drawn up like a bow, and the beard of his chin was as white as the snow. The stump of a pipe he held tight in his teeth, and the smoke had encircled his head like a wreath. He had a broad face and a little round belly that shook when he laughed like a bowlful of jelly. He was chubby and plump, a right jolly old elf, and I laughed when I saw him in spite of myself. A wink of his eye and a twist of his head soon gave me to know I had nothing to dread. He spoke not a word, but went straight to his work, and filled all the stockings, then turned with a jerk. And laying his finger aside of his nose, and giving a nod, up the chimney he rose. He sprang to the sleigh, to his team and gave a whistle, and away they all flew, like the down of a thistle. But I heard him exclaim, ere he drove out of sight, "Happy Christmas to all, and to all a good night."
Moore was, of course, proud of his work, and his children adored the story, and for an entire year, that was all that it was. By December 23rd, 1823, the poem was anonymously submitted to the Troy Sentinel in Rensselaer County, New York. The poem became widely loved with a rapid succession. The poem featured in newspapers, schools, and poem compilations. Its real big break was being featured in the New York Book of Poetry over a decade after it was originally published. In 1844, Moore released his own compilation of poems and included a visit from St. Nicholas. This was the first time the poem was claimed to be written by somebody. No longer was this tale anonymous, but Moore had finally taken credit for the literary history he made. This is where the story should end, an anonymous poem finally claimed by its owner. But this is only where this story begins. 14 years before Moore gathered his children to read them his newest poem, another poet by the name of Henry Livingston did the exact same thing with the exact same poem. Not much is actually known about Henry Livingston's personal life, but it was clear that he was of course a poet, having a portfolio of over 24 pieces of work. However, the vast majority of them were not published, as he pretty much would write them for his family. By the time A Visit from St. Nicholas had become famous in the paper, Livingston had been dead, as he died all the way back in 1828. Now, over 2 generations since then, the descendants of Livingston have been making a case to clear his name as the true author of this iconic poem. It is hard to take a 200-year-old claim at face value. We essentially would be putting trust into a 200-year-old game of telephone, bringing us to modern day where Livingston's descendants still claim he wrote the poem. However, there is some evidence pointing towards the fact that Moore might have actually been a fraud. Starting with the most basic of evidence, is that at least 5 children claim to have listened to the story told by Livingston, but this is really hard to take as true evidence. One of the children claimed to have had an original copy, with Livingston's writing clear as day. However, Livingston's house was burned down along with all of his valuables, including the possibly original copy. Without that piece of evidence, this all amounts to that aforementioned game of telephone. But this does perfectly lead into the next piece of evidence, and that does surround the actual poem. The poem was analyzed by a literary professor in Vassar. It was found that when you cross-reference A Visit from St. Nicholas with anything else that Moore had previously wrote, it just does not compare. Moore was anti-tobacco, while Livingston was pro-smoking, making it more evident that Livingston probably wrote it due to Santa smoking a pipe in the story. The poem also includes exclamation points, which doesn't mean much at the surface, but analyzing Moore's poems, it seems he barely used them, while Livingston used them extremely liberally. Even beyond this, the actual style of Livingston's poems seemed to much more closely resemble St. Nicholas than Moore's work. As a common attribute to Livingston's work was this sort of playful, jokey nature. Another scholar, Donald Foster, has noted that a pattern in Livingston's poem was to very frequently use and create repetition with the word all, which is precisely what happens in St. Nicholas. In the poem, there are multiple references to Dutch words, which would be strange coming from Moore, who was American, but Livingston was raised of Dutch heritage, with his mother speaking Dutch. Donner and Blitzen, 2 famous reindeer that accompany Santa, who are originally named Dunder and Bliksem, come from the Dutch language meaning thunder and lightning. The names have changed countless times, and the reasons are still unclear as to why, whether it be Bliksem was changed to Blitzen to better rhyme with Vixen, or a modern update to better fit all together, we are still pretty unsure. But what is important is that these names were originally made with Dutch connections. While we've taken a ton of time to talk about Livingston's case, which does look extremely convincing in many ways, it's important to bring up some points that could help Moore once again too. Firstly, there is precedent for Moore having some Dutch influence to use if the poem is really his. Moore was good friends with Washington Irving, the author of Rip Van Winkle, and Irving was very involved in Dutch culture, which could give Moore some credibility. Second of all, while many of Moore's poems do not seem to match the writing of St. Nicholas, there are a few that do very closely resemble it, most notably being The Pig and the Rooster, which has a super similar rhyme scheme. It's also important to note that the main character in the story specifically turns around and bids a rooster cock-a-doodle-doo, which is very similar to the line of St. Nick remembering to say one last greeting, Happy Christmas and to all a good night. There's also the obvious aspect of the fact that Moore stepped up and took credit at all. While you can endlessly speculate if he did steal this and come forward for credit that way, at the end of the day, this is still significant, because we have no proof of Livingston ever doing this in his life. While tackling a mystery, the passage of time has never really stopped us before. Whether we talk about 1400s vampires or 1960s serial killers, the main thing that can bring everything to a conclusive point is, of course, evidence, and unfortunately, it doesn't seem we have enough. No matter where I look, the evidence for either men creating such a long-lasting and influential poem is completely inconclusive. Hopefully in the future, more light could be shed on this long-lasting literary mystery. For whoever wrote this poem, all that is true is the effect it has had on many of our lives. It may just be a story, but for those who celebrate the holiday, it can perhaps serve as a time capsule, a way to bring you back to the days when you were a little kid, genuinely wondering when Santa would come through the chimney and what he would be giving you. And while I'm gonna assume none of you actually saw Santa, despite how hard many of you have tried, I hope that the fate of this true author is not the same. Alas, this year we wanted to celebrate the holidays and tell a tale by the fireplace. It's a stressful time, sure, but at the heart of the holidays is family. So if you've made it this far, turn off the video and go celebrate. It is the night before Christmas after all. Thank you all for watching. As always, my name is Sep from Debunk File. Happy holidays. We'll see you all next year.